I'll get on here. In The Office, where Michael Scott, every time he answers a call, it's Pam gives him 2 shots at it because the first one's always horrible. Answers it. He's like, Michael, this is Jan's on line 1. He's like, yo, Jan. And then, nope, haven't transferred you yet, Michael. And he goes, oh, okay. Hey, Jan. I feel like that's how our podcast intros are.
Yes.
We only go, the first take is never revealed.
Is this thing on? Is this thing on? Coming at you live.
For those of you listening here, we started this off, and Vern and I are sitting here trying to figure out if the podcast is working or if we're recording. So it's like, hello, can you hear me? And then Vern turns on the computer, and there's no camera. I see like his feet or something. I'm not sure what. It's like, who's behind that curtain? Who am I talking to today?
I was getting dressed. Jesus, you can't rush this.
Oh, hey, you know what happened this morning? This is great because I think it's something people can. They can relate to it in a different way, but it's a pretty nerdy one. I get on Amazon sometimes, and some people buy clothes or protein. I buy books, and I bought some books, and I got it in the mail, and it's kind of like I open the book. I go to the mail, and I open the book up. I'm like, you know what? This is the one right here. Like, this is the book I have been waiting for. And that feeling I've had every time you get a book, it's like, you know what? This is just like when you get your first protein tub of powder. You're like, you know what? I've been working out, but this protein right here, this is the missing link. This is a whole new level. Forget bench pressing. I need 2 more scoops of this thing, and I'm good to go.
This protein is going to change it all. I'm about to get so jacked. I like one of my favorite images like that, getting ready for something new, is it's like, you know, what do we need to do? And it's like, get in shape or exercise. It's like, well, when should we start? And it's like, Monday. And then what's today? Monday. Next Monday.
Next Monday. But I know you know the feeling though. When you get the protein or whatever it is, you're like, this is it.
Yeah.
Like, this is what I've been missing. My 225-pound bench press. See you later.
Yeah. Ass. My bars.
Yes. I'm not even going to work out today. I'm just going to drink protein.
This new creatine. This is it.
Yeah.
I can feel it.
It's like you walk in a vitamin shop and you look around. You're like, oh, this is the missing link right here. Look around. How do I pick one? I should have taken all these.
Where's the holographic label? That's the one I need. The one that says Beast on it. Of those. Or XXL. I need those. Holographic labels. That's the win.
Well, I love looking. I'm buying protein. God, I remember this was like in college. I was sitting there and it was like protein or mass builder. And I'm like, well, I'm not trying to not build mass. Sold me on the label right there.
So if I don't buy the mass builder, am I not committing to that? Am I just, that's the tone protein?
Well,
that's
protein. That's protein. Well, in your head, I'm like visualizing myself like on mass builder and not. And one's like, you know, kind of currently me. And then mass builder Max is like this large, chunky, but arms, sleeve, like the sleeves of my shirt's filled. And like, God, it's hard to walk. I'm like, dude, mass is the way to go. I envision bigger traps immediately. And so like, I might have worked out that day already, but I'll go like, you know what? I'll get some push-ups in, take some mass builder. You watch out.
How do I look? Start doing ad checks.
Yeah. On the way out. Hey, cashier man, I don't know if you realize I'm buying the mass builder. I don't know if you know, there's only 7 servings in this thing and 800 calories. So you just wait. I'm going to come back next week and be huge.
And also, I'm not sure, but I'm mixing protein in this, or peanut butter, not the regular peanut butter. This is the powder peanut butter. It mixes so much better.
Hey, that powdered peanut butter is fire though. I'm not sure if you've had it. That PB2, I got really into it at one point, like really like way too into it. To the point where
was that a punny joke? You're way too into
it. Yes. No, I did them. I got like, you know, it was probably bad. It's because it wasn't cheap. I got PB2 when it first came out, and I would buy it and like only eat that all day because I remember if you look at the back, it's basically like the same profile as like a protein powder. It's like 8 grams of protein. I remember like no fat, and I was like, hell yes. How many peanut butter sandwiches can I eat today? It's like chalky kind of. You're just like, oh, that's great for me.
So what book did you get?
I got an integrative physiology. Yeah. Saying it out loud. What a nerd. An integrative physiology book. It's an integrative systems. But actually, it's really cool. So what started my interest in this was I was reading about diets. Well, it was more like bio. It started with nutrition. And then I was like, oh, Max, I should know more about biochemistry. So then I was like reading biochemistry. I'm like, this is boring. Let me read about endocrinology. And so long story short, I was reading about cellular mechanisms of the body. And it actually stemmed, ironically, from protein, what we're talking about here. It's protein and carbs I was looking at, and how proper nutrition can mitigate a stress response. So there's an example. There's a paper by the group out of Kansas, and they do high power training. And like an idiot that I am, if I think high power training is good, I'm like, well, I'm going to do it every day. So, and then you get trashed immediately. And what happened was the paper looked at how you can have systems get messed up, feedback loops. And essentially, they got overtrained and they had what are called beta-2 adrenergic receptor desensitization, which is a fancy word you guys can Google. I'm not going to dive into it here. Point is, they showed protein and carbs helped reduce that desensitization. So I was like, well, I better start learning because I'm trying to power train nonstop. And so what you see, basically, long story short, is that if we're getting enough carbs, which is essentially our fuel source, and they've been so demonized. Don't eat carbs. I just ate 2 pieces of bread before this podcast. Literally nothing on it, just like a machine.
You're so fat. You're going to be so fat. Oh, my God. Disgusting.
Just like the mass builder. But the point is, carbs obviously are fuel. Carbs go to your liver and are synthesized as storing glycogen in your muscles as well. And when those stores get low, your body has to find a way to replenish the energy source. And so it basically, like, cortisol gets released and has a stress response to mobilize energy. And then, well, your enzymes and your structures and your hormones and your basically anything structural is protein. So it's like, oh, it makes sense. Protein, your structure, and then carbs, your fuel, need to be upped when you're, training. And so naturally, I went on Amazon and I had to log off. I forced logged off because I started putting my shopping cart full of books. It was like $700. And
God.
And I was like, Kelsey, stop, help. Help, I've already bought 2. So I ended up like canceling half the orders. But I got this new book, and like a child I am who, like, when you're a kid, you buy the shoes at the store and you put the shoes on and then you toss your old shoes into the box and throw it all away as you leave. Yeah. Basically what I was doing with the mailbox, I was sitting there ripping this package apart and I'm throwing it in the trash. Like, people are behind me like, dude, what are you doing? I'm like, don't worry, I'm just trying to read this book. It's like 9 a.m.
Santa came early, boys.
Yeah. Like, this is amazing. It's an interesting topic, though. It's pretty cool to think about. Like, oh, that's why we stress eat and stuff. Oh, because you're stressed and your body needs fuel. So, science is kind of cool, people, for you listening out there.
No, I think that's, it's such an interesting topic because, like you said, carbs are looked at a certain way, proteins looked at a certain way, but when it comes to the actual physiology of the body and our stress response towards things, those demonized items, that's what our body runs off of. That's the fuel. So, what you're trying to, say that you shouldn't take or shouldn't use is what your body really wants. It's really craving for those certain situations.
And yeah, and I think it gets, I don't say bastardized, maybe the right word for it, when people are like, oh, don't eat carbs because cookies have carbs. Well, there's different kind of carbs out there. Like, eating cookies and cake, yeah, they're great. Don't get me wrong. Let's not get it twisted. Let's not demonize those either. But that's not like comparable to a potato, or like a starchy tuber or something like that. So you can't draw that conclusion. And so, yes, eating cookies is not good, but yes, carbs are good for you. And so when we're working with a client, for example, and this is great because a lot of people, I'm sure, can relate to this. You'll get someone who reads like some magazine article and they're like, and then now they know more than you forever.
Yeah.
despite the fact you like are a trained professional in this. And like, well, Vern, found out today, can't eat carbs anymore. I'm not sure if you knew this. It's not like this is your profession, but I don't know. Breaking news, no more carbs for me. I'm strictly going to eat protein and, broccoli. And you're like, oh God, like, great.
Dr. Oz says
Yeah.
that chlorophyll is very, it just does not help the alkalinity of the blood inside your body.
Yeah. Well, I was checking out and I saw a label next to, Brad and Angelina Jolie's breakup that also carbs are bad. And it's in a magazine. It must be true.
Well, I was having this conversation with someone else about another topic. And I was like, I kind of miss that feeling though. That feeling of like discovering something new. Like it got brought up in conversation because she was talking about her dad and him trying a new pre-workout and like how it was going to change his workouts. And he was
yes.
better. And I was like, you know what? I miss that feeling. I miss that feeling of being like, oh, I got this new supplement. I got this new thing. Like this is good. Like we've been talking about, like I almost miss that feeling. It's almost like you learn so much that now I'm like, man, I know that doesn't work. I know that doesn't going to do that, but I miss that feeling of that.
You become jaded almost.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, nothing works. You don't know anything about it, which is the opposite too. Because like if you go and do something you're totally not experienced in, like for example, like I don't know anything about in the stock market. Oh, dude, you gotta buy this stock. Why are you buying that stock, Max? Because it's low, like, and it goes high after. Don't you know how stocks work, idiots?
A lot of potential.
Yeah. But it's true. There is something to envy about that, and it's like it's an irrational confidence.
Yeah.
And which is good, by the way. At times, you should have some irrational confidence in yourself. Maybe not in what you think you're saying, in the knowledge of what you're saying. But it is funny because you get like a lot of students. I taught at Iowa State, and this is great because you'll get a kick out of this. And they took a class where it was like must have been functional anatomy before they had my class. Mine was the last class, and it was an internship where they had to teach people in group fitness, which was great because I get everyone's first time experience working with clients every 7 weeks because they rotate. And it was just hilarious because you get the same repeated outcomes. And so there's an older adult group, and they come in, and the guy's like, all right, we're going to warm up our rectus femoris here. And I was like, dude, you think Mary Lou knows what a rectus femoris is? Like, can you please call it your thigh?
That is, to me, it's like I used to be like, dude, what are you trying to prove? But now to me, it's almost cool. Like, man, like I wish, bro, you got to try this glute activation sequence. And I'm like, let me hear it, big dog.
Well, it's like the irrational confidence. I had a salesperson come in once, and we were like, man, we must have been like 4 minutes into our facility. And it's a big facility. The guy looks at me and goes, hey, Max, I know your angle here. I know your play. And I was like, oh, please tell me. Very excited. We've only made it to the turf. What do we have here? It's like this like supreme confidence. And like, I do wish I had some of that irrationalness back, but it's good to lose it too, because irrational confidence comes with arrogance at times. And so irrational confidence doesn't mean that you can't have an open conversation, which is a big difference. It doesn't mean you're stubborn. So a lot of the kids were like, I have to call it my hallucis longus. It's your big toe. Please call it your big toe. And no one here knows what your hallucis longus is. It's very confusing, to be honest with you. Because like they must have gotten quizzed on it. Like, can you take me through a warm up and tell me all the muscles you're using? Like, we're now going to use our hallucis. Oh my God, dude! Can you please call it a big toe?
For sure. It's almost it's the same thing with like whenever I would talk to like a newfound strength and conditioning coach, or we're talking about personal trainers, and it's like this new periodization model. This is the Bulgarian method. This is, and I'm like, I miss that feeling of like, of course, we obviously don't know everything. So I'm, find new things all the time.
Say it
But
for yourself.
that that feeling of like discovering something new, it's almost like that cheat code in Madden or video games way back in the day. You're like, oh my God, I got unlimited lives in Contra now. I'm about to dominate this game.
No, it's true. It's like, again, it's that missing piece feeling. You get like the super training. The first thing you do, where is the depth jump program? Like you're flipping through it, and it's like 800 pages. And you're like, found the program. Don't need to read anything else. Gonna need to work through this puppy right now. This is why the book was made. A little hidden nugget right here.
There it is.
It's true. It's hilarious. On that note, we had some questions from people after we did our first podcast, and they were asking some things about learning, because they're like, "Oh, Max, we learn from you and Vernon," which I hope you guys don't. You don't want to learn anything from us. We stink. No, I'm kidding. just driving blind, basically. We're making this whole thing up as we go. No, I'm just kidding. But they're asking about, how do you learn? And again, I think it ties in nicely with that irrational confidence conversation, because if you point that confidence in the right direction of, hey, I'm going to go into something that's so uncomfortable that you might otherwise not want to do, but you're so confident in your abilities, you get exposed to so much more. And I'd be willing to say this firsthand. We were at the NSCA conference with Vern, and they were doing like example demos of people doing, Vern's taking through his famous landmine routine, because apparently Vernon invented the landmine. Fun fact.
Shut up.
We went to the bars after, and Vern brought a landmine peg and a barbell. We're just demoing landmines the whole time.
I'm not sure if you know who I am, but this is a landmine.
You want to give it a go?
You want me to sign this? Like, you want to take pictures with me in the landmine?
Yeah, me in the landmine. But the point was I didn't like going into demos. I hate doing demos. I hate it. But it's part of it is because you're not comfortable. I'm actually fairly reserved of a person at times. And I didn't like doing it because I didn't like looking bad or whatever self-conscious limitations I put on myself. But once you did it, you realize doing it is part of that learning process. Just doing it. And it's having that confidence in yourself to go and just do something, which you take a lot from, and how you can absorb information.
Oh, I mean, I totally agree. You know what they say, that old saying of, you don't know something. It's the levels of knowing something is, you learning it, you doing it, and then you teaching it to someone else type thing.
Mm-hmm.
That I think that instructional based of even doesn't even have to be in a conference setting. You just, maybe you're working out with your buddies and you're describing a movement and you're talking about, where they feel it, how you should feel it. It makes you sharper because now you're putting it into words. And I think that's one of my biggest weaknesses is my brain is doing all this stuff. It's just crazy. And I struggle sometimes with putting it into words. So like social media, when it comes to giving talks at conferences, I think that helps me tremendously because it forces you to verbalize what you're trying to visualize.
That is well put. I agree totally, because that's one of my things why I personally selfishly enjoy the Instagram page I run, because I'm forced to try and express these concepts in 750 words. And yeah, it's fun to have people like it and enjoy it, but it's really kind of a fun challenge for me. And if you guys listen to this last podcast, you know that I'm a formula guy. Uh-oh. What's coming next, nerd?
Oh my God.
I wrote a formula about learning.
Did you put it in a slope intercept form?
Yeah, y equals mx plus max.
Y equals max plus b.
Yeah. Max plus b. That's great. That should be my t-shirt. I'm a y equals max plus b. But the idea was, I was thinking about how I learn and where I fell short many times. I think it's cool to reflect on yourself and what you do well and poorly. And what I like to think about, I get in these ebbs and flows where I like to gather information, but you can't just gather information. You have to then give that information energy to connect with the information you have. And the example would be, if we just look at like from a physics standpoint, we have a glass, and in that glass, we can put in molecules. But the molecules will never collide unless we put an external energy into it. And so you see people who are either chronic collectors, people who just like to read and collect information, or people who are chronic doers. And in both ways, yes, you can get something out of it, but you get the most when you do and collect, because then you start to apply all this energy to this collection of information, and things and dots start to connect in a unique way.
So I like to think of it as it's kind of like I guess an analogy with school is the lecture hall is obviously where you collect that black and white principles, but without the lab, without the weight room, you don't apply it. And everyone knows in any science class you took, there was always a lab because you had to apply the principles that you were learning. So to me, that's where the weight room, the turf, the field, wherever it is comes to play, because you're learning all these things. You're trying to digest as much as possible, like you said. But if you are not going into the lab, metaphorically speaking, the weight room, where are you going to connect those dots? You're just collecting things.
Or you're the opposite, and all you do is the lab work, and you're never collecting.
Yeah.
And so both sides are issues, right? We can't just be one or the other. And what we can do then, now we look at other realms, and we talked about this earlier, like, hey, go take a business class, because you'll see how much that connects. The echo chamber effect of just collecting the same information. We don't want to collect, 25 Pikachus. You want to have a wide variety. You want to have all the Pokemon. You don't just want one.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if you guys are Pokemon fans, but if you guys remember playing the game back in the day, you needed an Earth guy, you need a Water guy, you need a Fire guy. You go fight the Elite Four, you're gonna get messed up. You can get torched if you just have, wall Pikachus out there. You'll get waxed.
A Pikachu only evolves once. What if you got a water Pokemon? You're gonna destroy them.
Yeah, come on, dude. Keep my Thunderstone with me. I'm gonna get that Raichu. Honestly, that dude was powerful. That dude would F stuff up.
I would take him down with my Squirtle though.
No, dude, come on. I was a big low key for all you nerds out there. The low key underrated Pokemon was Poliwrath, because he had that hypnosis you could do, and he was a third level evolver. So it was pretty sick. I mean, and also Gengar, man, I'm a nerd. You hear me rattling off Pokemon. It's all coming back to me in flashes and waves.
I got this binder of 9 cards, throwing them back and forth.
You know how much they're worth now?
An ungodly amount of money.
Well, I was home, and we had a bunch of first edition Pokemon cards because we were nerds like that and really liked it from an early stage. And my brother had them collected, and I played with them. I used them as little kids, so I'll get that. But some of the cards, if I kept them in a seal, were worth like $1,500 right now. And I was like, gosh, damn it. I could buy all the Pokemon cards if I just had this and sold it.
But going back to it, the learning thing, you have to have different avenues to learn. Mm-hmm. And even you, who you spend a ton of time on research articles and stuff. If anyone doesn't know Max, I mean, this dude, I remember when we first met, he was like, hey man, do you want me to send you the research articles that I'm reading? And I was like, sure, Max, maybe he'll send me once every week. I was like, bro, I feel bad. I don't have the time to read all these articles you're sending. But
Stop being a nerd, Max.
But it's the multiple avenues of education. So we talked about this in our first podcast, but when it comes to movement, and me specifically, how I've learned is I follow a ton of yoga stuff, watching jujitsu, watching combat sports, and just watching things like that, gymnastics. And it's just reading those, watching documentaries on those. I got really big into rock climbing when it comes into motivation, because everyone wants to read a military leadership book or something like that. But that sort of internal drive. And I got really into rock climbing documentaries, just seeing how people motivate themselves. And it's just when you open yourself to learning those new things, it allows you to connect those dots to things that you're currently doing in your life. And it's the old adage of what's the best book you've read is the book you've already read with the things you've learned since then.
No, exactly. And part of that goes back to us reflecting on our own education in the school system and realizing, well, there's two things I realized. One, is once you get out of your schooling, which is basically taken care of for you, right? It's controlled environment where they give you stuff to read. You have a chance to learn a lot more than other people, because there's a lot of people after school who don't even bother to learn anything new. Like they just stop learning completely.
Well,
And then
I hear people talk about, they'll ask like, well, what certification should I get? Or, I got my, what do I do? And they think that CSCS is like, that's it. It's the old saying of you never stop learning. And there's so much free information. It is kind of hard, I guess, to pick through, all the, alternatives that exist. But there's so much free stuff like self-education. I can say that I've learned more from just YouTube and self-research and reading articles than I did in any sort of formal educational system.
absolutely. And what happens is we get so endpoint kind of mindset. I have finished school. I am done learning. Or where can I go to so someone can teach me next? And all these have the common thread of someone else educating you versus you finding ways to educate yourself. And that's kind of where school lets you down. It never really teaches you how to learn. You never get an example would be you don't get a syllabus that says test at the end. And that's it. It has all of your chapters and then they teach to questions. And you're so busy looking for a question and an answer that we really miss the whole roots of learning. And that is that it's A, not black and white, and B, that it's a self-driven process. And this is like an example would be like I fell asleep in my classes all the time because I didn't understand how human physiology related to strength and conditioning, right? That statement alone is so ironic. How does human physiology relate to strength and conditioning? It should be very much pretty obvious, but I never connected it. The schooling was never like, hey, you're going to take this class. And then on top of that, you're going to have to then take it and relate it to the field of work you want to go into. There was never that synthesis approach. It was always like, take this. What's the master gland? A, is it the pituitary? B, is it your thymus? Or C, your liver? Like, okay, well, that's not teaching me to think, an example would be, well, the answer is pituitary, but a better question would be fill in the blank or write a little paragraph. How does the pituitary get affected by, say, high levels of stress and strength training?
Yeah, I think for sure. And it's not if we were to say problems, and I'm not going to say, oh, what's the biggest problem in strength and conditioning, blah, 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 but
please tell me what is, Vernon, the one problem that is with strength and conditioning. No,
it's the problem solving. It's the critical thinking. It's, we get locked into this mindset of a linear flow chart. Like, oh, this is a problem. Next, this is a problem. Next, this is a problem. Next, that it's hard to just for some coaches that I've talked to, and not even coaches, just people in general. If there's, we can even talk about relationship advice. If there's a problem and then there's a solution, what happens in between all this? Mm-hmm. And I think the coolest part is when you identify a problem, how did you identify the problem? That whole thought process is huge. It's so problem solution. How do we get from a problem to a solution? Well, how about we open door number one, and how did you even identify that the problem is there? Because that's what most people miss on, is they don't even know that a problem exists. And then by the time they have a chance to integrate a solution, not to get relationship, but sometimes it's too late at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the idea of a relationship device too. You're giving a good point. I don't want to interrupt you, but the relationship device could also be a great option. No, but it's really true, because we're really surface level on a lot of our approaches, where it's here are waves. How do I get over waves? Versus what's causing the waves. Ooh. And understanding that, it's gravity. The depth matters. Is there a canyon underneath the water I'm traveling, which causes larger waves? And so often we look at problem and we look at solution, but the solution actually isn't fully correct because we don't actually understand the problem. We only understand the symptom of the problem. We have a relationship, we fight. Therefore, not fighting or pacifying the argument is a solution. Well, that's not the problem. It's not we fight. It's that Max gets anxiety over stuff and then he lashes out or is rude and comments is impatience, which leads to a fight because he's not emotionally educated in the context. So it's not fight. It's fix the anxiety. Well, okay, then let's address why is there anxiety? What's happening? An example would that be in our world, it's when should I deload? This is a great question I get all the time. When should I deload in my strength training? That's a very complex question. Okay, what did you do before? What's the problem? The problem is you're fatigued. Okay, is your nutrition okay? Do you need a deload because it's nutritional sub-optimization, or is it excessive Newtonian load on the body, like lifting weights? And then when we understand the problem, we could understand the solutions. Sleep. Okay, what kind of sleep? We can't just say sleep. We can't stop there. What kind of sleep? Is it deep? Is it REM? Is it number of disturbances per night? Okay, nutrition. Can't just stop there. Is it carbs, fats, and proteins? Can't stop there. What kind of carbs? Eating cookies is not going to be the same as eating a potato, right? Okay, and it's going to be recovery. Well, what do we mean by recovery? Oh, is recovery doing an aerobic exercise? Well, that's not necessarily recovery. That's just doing a lighter exercise. So there's all these variables that go into it. And like you said, we're so often that we are in strength and conditioning. And I don't want to speak out of turn and nothing rude about this, but we like to find problems that other people present to us, i.e., we must do rate of force development training, or we must do metabolic conditioning, because our athletes need it. And like the problem was brought to your attention by someone else in a conference or something you read, but it's not actually contextual to a real problem that you're encountering. Because you've now manifested a problem, you have now manifested an erroneous solution. And so your initial hypothesis your initial identification of a problem and your hypothesis of a solution is only going to make sense when the problem's identified. Here's an example. If we are doing something like, I want to understand how to control or how to, lower HbA1c, which is a high blood sugar diabetic potential marker of blood. Okay, cool. That's my hypothesis. You have to have a hypothesis related to the problem. You can't say, I think, I believe that rowing a boat will reduce HbA1c, because it could give you an answer that's correct, right? It will lower it, but it's because of metabolic activity, not because you rowed a damn boat. And so if you did this process, you'd have to identify every single means of metabolic activity. You couldn't say high increase in metabolic activity help regulate, potential glucose levels in the blood. So what happens is if you're one step off, you find all the periphery of it. So you keep saying, oh, rowing the boat works. Oh, walking works. Walking down the stairs works. Walking up the stairs works. Walking sideways up the stairs. It can be infinitesimal. Yeah. And so we don't identify the right problem. So our hypothesis to the solution is naturally off by one. So we don't actually address the problem. And that gives us erroneous context of how we interpret it.
Yeah. I mean, the correlation without, all correlation does not equal causation. I mean, once again, it's being open to identifying those problems and understanding that your problem is different from another problem. So one of my favorite things with the concept of deload, and obviously I'm not trying to get on anyone's concept with deload, is it's programmed. Like you're anticipating a deload, but the body, as you said, if you are prepared, nutrition's on point, sleep's on point, you're doing well, your family life's great, your job life's great, maybe you have a very easy workload from a stress standpoint, maybe you don't need a deload, but now you're taking a deload that you don't need. Or someone that's like, well, I have a deload in 3 weeks, but I need it now. And they push through for 3 more weeks, just frying their nervous system when they should have just took it right then and there when it was needed, because that problem existed right then.
Mm-hmm. It's again the not understanding the problem, because you have manifested a solution based on an assumptuous problem, which doesn't exist. And like if you're in a relationship, if you assume problems, you're going to be in a pickle. Like you can't just assume what the issue is. Again, and that's how you talk to people. People you might talk to one day might be really mean to you, but it's because not they're mean or mean don't like you. They might have had stuff going on in their life. So if you assume that their response is strictly based on that isolated, non-contextualized emotional discourse, then you're gonna be probably not in the best state, as opposed to trying to understand maybe they had something going on, maybe there was another issue that was happening that caused that outlash.
I have a good example of something like that. I used to work a lot with female volleyball players, specifically teenagers. And man, the changes that occur on a weekly basis are astronomical. And I remember one of the volleyball coaches one time, he was like, Vernon, we got this new thing. I am communicating so well with these girls. And I was like, holy shit. All right, man, what is this? What is this magical wizardry you got going on? And he was like, I'm doing a Myers-Briggs test on every single athlete. And I was like, man, I appreciate your want and your need and your ability to, like you said, try to identify a problem that may or may not exist, but the way you're going about it is completely wrong. And I was like, you're telling me you're going to evaluate and you're going to talk to a young woman for an entire year or season based off of one test that, who knows what may have been going on that day. Maybe they're super stressed. Maybe they broke up with their boyfriend. Maybe they're in their menstrual cycle. Like, all these factors come into play where next week they could be a completely different person. And now you've pegged them from something that they're not. One of my favorite metaphors for this is there's a statistician and a philosopher sitting at, a 10,000 square foot or whatever it is, skyscraper, and they're looking down at a T intersection. And the statistician knows that if there's 100 cars that approach this intersection, 50 of them are going to turn left and 50 of them are going to turn right. The philosopher knows that all 100 could turn left and all 100 can turn right, because each car is powered by an individual with their own values, their own beliefs, their own needs for that day. And every single instance is its own independent instant.
Interesting. It's the autonomous agent argument, where we ourselves are autonomous agents within a world of influences that direct this. And so while we have the freedom of choice is influenced by what we sample around our world. And so if you are assuming that freedom of choice one day is going to be the same as freedom of choice every day, despite the fact freedom of choice being not necessarily not as free, because it is free for you to choose, but more influenced to a greater extent by the environment that we live in, then therefore we can't use predictive models, like you said, turning left every time, every time. And now with that, though, there's a very famous quote: all models are wrong, but some are useful. Ooh. And I love this because you get the dichotomy of, or I guess it's the juxtaposition of two schools of thought. You must only use science, and you must never use science. and my belief on that is, the only people I think, you should use science. You should use it with context. If you use science blindly, that's not what science is used for. So in my opinion, that's not even using science. That's using loaded arguments to justify an action or your own actions. Now, if you use no science, because you say people who use science are stupid, well, that's also pretty stupid, because now you've assumed that you have now known and can quantify subconsciously better than that of other statistical outcomes. So it's like, I don't need a biomechanical model because somehow I am one. I'm like, oh no, you're probably not one either. Like, because that's a massive, by saying that you don't need science, you have now leveraged your own thought as a higher level of justification than science itself. So that argument doesn't make sense either. What it should be looked at, it's not using or not using science. It's the utilization of the science you have. So you should be able to use it. And just like a basketball, some use it better than others. How do you wield your own scientific understanding? And so don't think of it as this this vehicle of guaranteed fact, what people like to think. This paper said this. No, it's a vehicle to help understand your reasoning as you as an autonomous agent to then synthesize what's happening around the world. And that's a very, very drastic difference, because we read things like the news. You'll read things all the time. Science claims fat kills all. Science claims carbs kill all. Like, oh my God, how does everything kill everybody? Like, I guess technically in the specific doses, right? But it's our due diligence to not use an interpretation that someone else has leveraged from an article to leverage their own position, which is why I like to open up all my talks and when I do a presentation by saying, don't believe me. Don't believe me, but you have to prove me wrong. Right? So you don't just get to ignore me, but you have to prove what I say incorrectly, because by doing so, you might find out that I am correct, but you have found out under the justification or under the synthesis of your own knowledge. Because what happens is, if I say something, it's contextually laden with all my experience. So I might say something which in my head means one thing, but you as the consumer don't have that context. And so therefore you interpret it as how you can interpret it. But remember, I'm interpreting an interpretation in a presentation. So you've moved two levels apart. And so what happens now, if you go to a presentation and you take what I say, I've interpreted the researcher's interpretation, which you've now interpreted my interpretation. So now we're playing telephone here. And if we ever played telephone in third grade, you always got the one kid where it starts off as, I want to order bananas. And then you get the last kid who says, the little asshole who's like, he wants to go to the ocean. And so the last person is like, I'm going to the ocean. And they're like, no, that's not what we said. We said order bananas. Like, who screwed this up on purpose? That would be me, by the way, who would always do that. Because I thought it was hilarious to cause chaos. But that's the point. We can't be playing telephone. And the further we get from the source, A, the more diluted it becomes in our own biases. How I interpret it's one way. But then B, it becomes further from what the actual attempted reasoning behind the paper was. And so that's how we have to think about our world a little bit.
So it's like you said, it's that thinking about or critically thinking about problems. So for me specifically, when people see something on social media, they're like, oh my God, I'm going to put this. Where can I put this into my program? I'm like, guys, these are ingredients. Like, you're trying to figure out a recipe. Me and you both can have hamburger, but you can make meatloaf and I can make, some delicious spaghetti. It's understanding there's a big difference between recipes and ingredients. And like you said, if all you're doing is looking at ingredients, like, oh, well, Max does this, well, Vernon does this, this is how he did it, this is when he did it. That might be, I did it with that athlete for that situation in that instance. For a problem that they had that I needed to come up with a solution for. Whereas if you're not synthesizing it like that, you're just starting with where I left off and not ever thinking about what I said before, having the problem, what was before the problem that made me get to that point? What happened before that made me say, oh, I have a problem. Now I need a solution.
Interesting. I like that, because it kind of relates back to the easy bake oven outcome of our current digestion of information. For those of you remember, I always wanted an easy bake oven, by the way. You can make your own cookies. Fire. Dude, I would have just been large and in charge if I had an easy bake oven, because I would have been A, selling and wielding those, and also B, consuming. I'd be, you're not supposed to consume your own product, right? Kind of deal. Like, I would have been knee deep in easy bake oven franchising at that age. Well, the point is, for those in easy bake oven, they gave you some ingredients and you put them and you poured them into a tub and you put them in an oven. It came out and it was fast and easy. And that's how our culture has gone towards information consumption, fast, easy information consumption. And it's tough because people who want to break into the industry for strength conditioning, their first exposure might be through Instagram, and that leads them to simply seeking out exercises as opposed to seeking out solutions.
Mm.
And so, yes, it's a great, great resource because you get exposed to many different people. But that's why long form discussions have become much more interesting, because our society prior to 70 years ago was long form discussion. Think about, Socrates back when, great philosophers. They didn't tweet. Socrates did not sit there and think and then let out a tweet. They're quite verbose. They're long-winded. They're elegant in the words they used. And so we've lost what is the foundation of information through communication. If you look at the linear, not non-linear progression of how we've talked and how we've communicated, we actually went from, if we say, we went from like, the monkey to, now eventually a philosopher. We've actually regressed out of that area of thought, how we think, how we discuss, because now we've been occupied. Prior to the electronics and all the mass amounts of information you can gather, thought was thought. Thought was what occupied your time. You didn't get to just watch TV, which is why they figured out ways to track celestial patterns back in Egypt in ways that we can't do it still. Because if you ever spent a day on the plane, you realize, oh my God, 24 hours is so much time. You can get so much done. And as humans, we like to be occupied. And at times the occupation of thought doesn't yield any return on investment. And it just is simply an occupation or holding pattern as opposed to a thought that leads to progression.
So I think it goes with, our autonomy as ourselves. Like we are creatures of habit. We like things. We like waking up in the morning, having our cup of coffee, getting our workout in a specific time. It takes me 16 minutes to get to the gym. If I hit traffic, it inconveniences me. I normally stop and get my coffee. Well, my coffee shop's closed today for whatever reason. And think about how we are habitual human beings, which is completely normal. I have my habits that I like to do. But as coaches, you can't fall into that because the coaching bias that exists from wanting that autonomy, it's almost encouraged. Everyone asks like, hey, I got this new Excel spreadsheet. This is the way that you can program everything. It's, hey, try this program. It's this program. It's this. It's something that's already created without ever considering how it's going to be implemented and who it's going to be implemented with. So I think that's very powerful. It's like, we encourage autonomy. We encourage being prepared and having all this stuff ready and one size fits all. But how do we step back and be like, it's good to be prepared. It's good to have that autonomy. But at the same time, everyone's different. Like we can't be biased as coaches so that it reaps worse rewards for the athletes that we're working with.
Absolutely. And there's a level of tribalism that occurs there because now we have this encouragement of autonomy, but at the same time, we have a high need for community. And at times, community then drives our like-minded thought processes. And so when you go to a convention, for example, especially a strength conditioning convention, I can almost guarantee you that the number of people that will show up to a cardio training presentation compared to a powerlifting presentation would be drastically different. Why? Because in our strength and conditioning community, it has been pedestaled almost. The need for heavy lifting has been, it's popularized. And it's not as cool. People like to say, what's cardio? It's called higher reps. Well, that's fine to say, but that constant dogmatic representation of a large portion of health, mind you, massively important metabolic science has been ignored because it's not cool, right? It's not, no one wants to run a mile. That's not cool, man. And despite us not making it or thinking that's going to lead to a change in perception and attitude, if you look at kids learning to, get into a community, the first thing they want to do is relate to it. And so they to themselves, you'll meet, like, especially my experience teaching these kids is like, what's cardio? Like as a joke, because they do it to mimic those that they want to be like. And in that, it now develops an isolated area that does not include a massively important science. And we have to break that mindset. It's great to be helpful. It's okay to be wanted and liked and be with groups. But in that same situation, if it's limiting our thought processes and how we think certain things relate to our field, then we ourselves are doing the younger generation and even ourselves a disservice to the continuing education process.
I mean, you nailed that on the head. I mean, you are a strength and conditioning coach.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's literally in your title. But if I was to go to a conference, or even if I was to drop into someone's facility and I'm like, hey, man, you mind if we get a workout in today? Of course, you're probably going to squat, bench, or deadlift. Anything outside of that, you're going to be like, wait, what? Like you said, I'm just going to do more reps. It's so frowned upon. But when we really think about the aerobic system and its robustness, especially not just with our athletes, but as a coach, with how much stress you deal with on a daily basis, with the limited amount of sleep, with the amount of caffeinated beverages, with the food that many of us eat, we could really benefit from some aerobic conditioning. And
yes. Absolutely. I mean, that it couldn't be more well said. And it's a great topic. It's a great topic to end on, too, because I want you guys to think about this as we go through our discussions that we have more here. Again, like, don't listen to us. Well, listen to us, but don't prove us wrong. Like, kind of take the level to go and take it to the for you to go dive a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I agree. Everything we say, and when me and Max talk about this stuff, I don't want taking notes is cool, but leave space on your page where you're taking notes that you can grow from. Don't just take the notes and put it in a cement tablet where that's the gospel. Write it down on a sheet of paper with a couple spaces between where you can grow from that. How can you implement? Where can you take this? Because your situation is completely different from ours. And the purpose of all of this to me and Max is to encourage thought, to encourage thinking, to show a growth mindset that we have. So leave space on your paper. Don't just take notes every line.
Absolutely. So take that advice. I appreciate you guys listening. Thank you again for all the support. We're excited to get this rolling here. It means a lot for all the positive feedback we had so far. And we have some fun stuff coming up here in the near future that you guys will all really enjoy. So thanks, guys.
Peace.